A very good evening to you all, respected doctors. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all on this Sunday evening for a very interesting webinar on ECG in emergency room, a case-based discussion. For this webinar, we have a very learned and respected panel. This program will be moderated by a vibrant and dynamic Dr. Smith Srivastav sir. We have two top cardiologists from Chhattisgarh and Tamil Nadu for this program as a speaker, Dr. Javed Parvez sir from Raipur and Dr. Sanjay PV sir from Chennai. It's my honor to introduce moderator of the program, always smiling like his name, Dr. Smith sir. Dr. Smith sir is Associate Professor and Head of Department of Cardiology at Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Medical College, Raipur. Sir is the winner of National Gold Medal for Best Paper in Jerrycon 2009. He is a Fellow of American College of Cardiology. He is a Fellow of International Medical Science Academy. With this, I request Dr. Smith sir to initiate the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Avinash. It's always a pleasure to
sir, I'll take. Yeah.
Hello. Am I audible?
Sir, you can introduce. Yeah, you are audible, sir.
It's always a pleasure to introduce the two speakers. They are very good friends. And Dr. Javed is here at Raipur, and he'll be the first speaker. And the mode they have taken up is quite different from the routine webinars that we have almost now are happening every day. Today, they have decided and they have taken up a collection of ECGs, and one would be talking about ECGs in that we come across in the emergency room. The other would be talking about the ECG changes with electrolyte imbalances. Both are very important because this is what we witness in our day-to-day working. And I invite Dr. Javed Parvez, electrophysiologist from Raipur, to carry on or to start his presentation.
Thank you, sir. Just let me start sharing my screen. Okay. So I think the screen is visible, right?
Visible,
okay,
sir.
So very good evening to all. And before we begin, I must thank Dr. Smith. As you have seen, he has a lot of various responsibilities which he fulfills in the best possible ways. And still, despite all those responsibilities, he manages to, to turn up for this event. And I would be very grateful for him to be available for this event. So as the time is short and without much further ado, let's get into the job at hand. So we would like to discuss today ECG in the emergency room. So basically, we have designed this program so that we will discuss it as a case-based module. So we will be presenting you some ECGs with very brief history and very brief options in the light of those ECGs, what would be the best modality or diagnosis achieved in the light of those ECGs. So the slide is not moving. Okay. Before we move on any further, this is a very small, humble attempt by us. This is a WhatsApp group which is run by me, and Dr. Sanjay is also a part of it. This is only for discussing, only just for the love of ECGs, and there are no social discussions there. So if anybody is interested to join, please message your IPCA team so that you can be part of our discussions. So there are a lot of critical clues and a lot of decisions which are based on the ECG in the emergency room, and not only diagnosis, certain times certain therapeutic decisions are also based on ECG findings. So that's what is our motto for this program today. So basically, they can broadly there are these four scenarios where ECG can be very helpful. One is chest pain, evaluation of a patient with chest pain. The other is dyspnea, evaluation of a patient with syncope, and evaluation of patient with palpitations. In order to keep the things simple and the presentation short, I have skipped the palpitations part because palpitations can be because of various tachyarrhythmias, brady, so on and so forth. So it requires another certain presentation. So I mean, we would be happy to do another presentation on palpitations. You can post your suggestions in the comment group. So we'll be discussing basically a lot of chest pain cases, couple of cases of syncope maybe, and dyspnea. Okay, so this is prototype. have a certain history which is visible to you all. So this is a case of 50-year-old male, a diabetic who has who is stable vitally and has recent onset dyspnea. So based on this ECG findings, what would be in this patient? So would it be to get serum electrolytes, or would it be best to activate the cath lab? So have a look at this ECG, and you'll be provided with 30 seconds of time. And I believe there is a poll which is available to all of the viewers. You can poll in whether you would like to go for option A, that is get serum electrolytes, or option B, which is to activate the cath lab in the light of this ECG. So as and when the results are available, I think Dr. Smith or Dr. Sanjay can help me out with the poll results. You can start the poll now.
Okay, Dr. Javed, we have a tie. We have exact 50-50 in each group for each option.
Right, sir. So this is that further signifies the problem that this kind of ECG is it's sort of confusing. Whether this represents electrolyte imbalance or activation of cath lab. We will see the answer very soon. So the finding here is, sometimes this presentation is slow to respond. Yeah. So this is the chief finding here in this ECG. So what you have basically here is sinus rhythm ECG. You have left axis 1:1 AV conduction, and then you have sort of changes, that is V1 to V3, which are abnormal. So you have prominent looking T waves and sloping ST segment depression. So this is nothing but a classical T wave. Usually the usual description of this is like this ECG. So suppose if I had presented you this ECG, most of you would have opted for correctly diagnose this as De Winter's T wave, and you would have opted for invasive management for the previous case. So what is this De Winter? To understand this, we must understand that there are three varieties of basically large varieties. You can have an upsloping type, you can have a downsloping horizontal type, and you can have various causes for these types. Why this is important to know is because De Winter's T wave are defined as tall, prominent, symmetric T waves in the associated with upsloping S segment depression, which is at the J point in the precordial leads. And you don't have in precordial leads, and you usually have certain subtle ST segment elevation in lead AVR, and this is more or less this signifies acute total or subtotal LAD occlusion, that is left anterior descending artery occlusion. So that is very important to identify this sign. So this sign, this was described by De Winter himself in his case report. So they studied ECGs of around 1532. All patients had this ECG finding, and all of them had LAD occlusion. So coming to the next question is how sensitive specific the sign is. So again, this sign is very specific. You must understand that this sign is very specific. The positive predictive value for LAD occlusion as the culprit is around 95 to 100%. And many of the in many of the school of thoughts, this is certified as STEMI equivalent. So if you have this, you are dealing with LAD occlusion. That is one. And another thing is whether to thrombolize these patients or not is a different story. There is slight difference in multiples, but everyone understands that this pattern is associated with acute or subacute total LAD occlusion. That's why the correct answer for the question was to activate the cath lab. These patients are, they are having LAD occlusions, and many a times, if you follow these patients up, you will see frank ST segment elevation or acute anterior wall MI. And many of these patients do well to conservative management, as has been reported by De Winter himself. So the best strategy, if you find De Winter's T wave in any patient who's got acute symptoms, this patient dyspnea. So this patient is diabetic, so the dyspnea is an angina equivalent here. So very significant finding. You must activate cath lab here. Now coming to the other option, Why not the electrolyte imbalance? There is slight lag that this slide. Yeah, it's changed now. So in hyperkalemia, so you can confuse these T waves for hyperkalemia. So the important is that in acute ischemia, you have which are prominent, while in hyperkalemia they are narrow and above. So if you are seeing that, suppose somebody has put his thumbs above the T wave and pinched it in between his thumb and finger, T wave usually signifies hyperkalemia. Another important point is the QT will be usually prolonged because of ischemia. By hyperkalemia, QT is not prolonged. So this is how we differentiate De Winter's T wave from hyperkalemia. Patient, while he was being shifted to cath lab, you can see here frank ST elevation MI developed. So that's how that's why the significance of this. Now coming to the second case, this is from a 46-year-old male patient who had chest pain 3 hours ago, and now he is chest pain free. Again, you have ECG and in findings, what would be the best strategy? With the cath lab again, or to go for a conservative approach. So you have 30 seconds to look ECG, go for the polling. Okay. So the purpose of
everyone
this
agrees
question,
there is
this ECG
100% for conservative management.
Yes, Dr. Smith.
Yeah, it's 100% for conservative management.
All of you believe that this is television MI or some not significant. I'd like to go for right, 100% for conservative management. So I'll highlight the findings, then we'll discuss the answer. So again, here, the patient is having sinus rhythm ECG, 1:1 AV conduction, and we have some T wave invergence. Most in middle leads, that is V1 to it goes up to V6. Then you can have then we have some T wave invergence in one AVL. So the important thing is to identify this pattern again, that this is a kind of a biphasic T wave inversion which signifies Wellens syndrome. So we'll see what Wellens syndrome is, probably able to answer this question. Wellens syndrome, again, just little bit of history we have behind this Wellens syndrome. It was originally described by Wellens in 1982. You can even at the beginning of invasive cardiology, at those times they have this sign. If you have this biphasic T wave invergence, so again Wellens T waves, these are called. So if you have these T wave invergence along with pain, becomes syndrome. If you don't have chest pain, just these T waves, Wellens sign. So what this is of two types. So you have a type where you have mid precordial leads biphasic T wave inversion, T wave which is sort of biphasic, and in type B you have symmetrical deep prominent T wave inversions. So if it's to you with chest pain along with these sort of T wave inversions, again this finding is very specific for total or sub. So this is how this is what Wellens syndrome. You have minimal elevation precordial Q waves, preserved R waves, and this is very important. In ECG pattern is present in pain-free state. So as in our case, he had chest pain 3 hours before, and while presentation with this ECG, he didn't have any chest pain. And again, very important thing is that normal or very slightly elevated serum cardiac markers. So basically, your cardiac troponin, and also this responds very poorly to conservative. Again, described himself by Wellen. So if you have this sort of T wave invergence in the emergency room, and you have chest activate cath lab, and conservative treatment is considered in these patients. It takes time to respond. Whether this is because of okay. So this is how the usual evolution of T waves over course of time. So initially you can have just these biphasic T waves. Over a course of time, the negative part of T wave deepens. So both of these are type A Wellens pattern. T wave inversion, which evolves into kind of pattern B. And you can also have ST segment elevation, MI pattern preceding or following these sort of patterns. Especially if you have a non-ST elevation, you are seeing the type of T waves on the ECG. This finding is very, very specific, up to the tune of 96%. AD culprit lesion, and again these patients respond with management. This should be subjected to cardiac lab. So that's why I showed these two ECGs to make you aware of these two findings, where we have to activate cath lab very early, and there is very little role of conservative management. Okay, this is another example of Wellens type B type of T waves, where you have a symmetrical T wave emergence which are deep and not biphasic. The type B is much more commoner, but one type B is lesser specific than type A. So if you have type A pattern, it's kind of more specific. It guarantees it's more likely. While type B can be seen in even without LAD occlusion in patients, especially who have LBBB and left ventricular hypertrophy. Now coming to question number 3. So this is another very important ECG to drive home another teaching point. So there is a 46-year-old patient with epigastric discomfort comes to emergency room in the middle of night, 2 a.m. and you see these ECG, and you have these two options. So out of these two options, which is more useful in the light of the ECG find? One is to do a troponin for this patient, or to look for an older ECG. So this is very common sort of a presentation. That's why I have given you. You have 30 seconds to do the polling, and discussion on this ECG. Okay, so I got the results. I think
100% for
people
looking at older ECG.
They would like to have a look at an older ECG. Yes, yes. So this is again very, very important point, not only in this ECG and in any other scenario, whether you are dealing with syncope, you are dealing with the tachycardia, you are dealing with the useful thing. If you have a certain patient, to ask for older ECGs to find out whether there's any density of, so that is the most useful thing. Troponin is not a wrong answer, but the question is which of them is more useful. If you must remember, there are certain false negative causes of troponin elevation. Troponin elevation takes certain time to develop. While if you have a look at an older ECG, the amount of information you can get is invaluable. So let us see what is the important ECG is. Basically, this ECG shows you have sinus rhythm. 1:1 AV conduct. Only abnormality which I can see here is there is some T wave inversion in lead AVL. There is some ST flattening in lead 1. Nothing else. So this is the abnormal finding. Again, many of the ECG annotating machines, this would be passed as normal, and many of in busy OPDs this could be passed off as normal. But I would like to bring your attention to this, that if you have a new onset T wave inversion in the light of chest pain in any patient isolated in lead AVL, then it is very significant. So we saw the older ECGs of this patient. You see this older ECG, there is no no T wave inversion in the old ECG. The ST segment is nice, normal in the older ECG in the lead 1 as well. So definitely this T wave inversion was new. And if what you can see is the ST segment depression worsened in lead 1, and you are seeing sort of hyperacute T waves in lead 3 and AV. The ST is beginning to elevate. Another, while this patient was being shifted to cath lab, now we can see this patient has developed elevation MI. This is an inferior wall MI. So there are a lot of people who have looked up into this finding, that if you have new onset T wave inversion in the context of angina, specifically in AVL, so there is no global T wave inversion. T wave inversion only in one lead, that is AVL. That is very important. And as these studies, these are couple of them are very recent studies. One is from Japan and is from Middle East. They have shown that the specificity of this finding, that this is the different, and this signifies either LE or RC occlusion. The specificity is between 20 to 85%. So in our patient, this was basically probably because of a reciprocal change. So a reciprocal change of an inferior wall MI usually appears in the lateral leads, and many a times the reciprocal change can appear earlier than the original ST segment elevations themselves. The other thing is, if you have a inversion isolated in and the patient is suffering from chronic stable angina, this localizes the lesion to mid LAD. Again, the sensitivity and specificity varies from 60% to 70% to the tune of. So only if you are aware of this finding, you will not neglect this. And the way to find out whether this is new or old is to compare it with older ECG. Again, this is a recent paper from American Journal of Emergency Medicine, where they have looked up into this, whether the AVL on electrocardiogram, it is as important in diagnosing early myocardial infarction. So this is sort of easier sort of question. Number 4, where you have a 65-year-old pain since 4-hour duration, sweating, and the patient receives nitrate agency. What do you think about this therapy that is being administered to the patient, that is nitrates, in the light of the ECG findings here, whether this therapy nitrate is appropriate or inappropriate? That is the question. So again, we'll wait for all of you to respond, and we'll see the poll. Then we'll probably, quickly, because we are lagging behind in time. So quickly, I'll go through the.
In between the poll is happening, Javed, I'll put 2 questions. One question is asked by Dr. Animesh Chaudhary. Deep dragger-like T waves in HOCM, how do you differentiate them from valence? And Dr. Manoj Gupta has asked, Q waves in V1 to V3 were present there. Don't they rule out valence?
Yes, deep dagger-like. Yes.
Meanwhile, I'll also give you the report, poll results. Appropriate is 46%, inappropriate is 53%.
Right. So first I'll answer the previous 2 questions, then I'll go on to this one, so that people can have more time looking into this ECG. So the question regarding the query of Dr. Animesh, how does one differentiate valence from T wave invergence in HOCM? So basically in HOCM you will have LVH, that is number 1, and you will have T wave invergence, which will be associated and asymmetric. While in acute ischemia you have symmetrical T wave invergence, and not necessarily you will have LVH in all the patients. The other thing is that this out of these 2 valence types which I have described, type A and type B, type A is more specific of detecting acute ischemia of acute LAD occlusion. So again, if you have type B sort of valence type B, it can be non-specific. So you can have, as I mentioned earlier, you can have the same T wave invergence in a patient who's got LVH, or in a patient who's got pulmonary embolism, left bundle branch block. There can be various DDs, but in the light, if you have a patient who presents with acute onset chest pain, the chest pain has resolved, and you have a type A valence pattern, this is very highly specific acute LAD occlusion. Now, what was the question? I kind of missed the other question, Dr. Smith.
Yeah, it's Q waves were present in V1 to V3. Don't they rule out valence? Q waves were present in V1 to V3.
In the given patient? Okay, I'm going back to the older ECG. Yes, this is here is the ECG. What I think what they have missed is that there is very small R wave here. So if you have a small R and big S complex in V1 to V2 is kind of normal. You should always try to look for this small R, because V1, V2 are the leads are lying on the right side of the chest, and they overlie right ventricle. So the predominant LV mass is from the left ventricle. The QRS vector can have a small R and a big deep S. So you don't have a Q waves here. What you have is a small R and big S. And on the top of it, you have this ST coving, and you have this biphasic T wave inversion. So this is not old anterior wall MI. This is basically a type. It's a valence type A. Okay, we'll go to the, yeah. So this is basically inferior wall MI. Almost every, you have sinus rhythm 1:1 AV conduction. You have ST segment elevation, which is more in lead 3 than lead 2, and segment depression on AVL, and there are certain V1, V2 that indicate that this is right ventricular infarction. So what findings we'll discuss in the other slide, and we'll come back. So how do you diagnose right ventricular infarction on a 12 lead ECG? So basically, in right ventricular infarction should be suspected in all the patients who presents with inferior wall MI, and if you have ST segment elevation in lead 2, again because lead 3 is more towards the right side and it indicates RCA involvement. So if you have lead 3 ST elevation more than lead 2, you should suspect it. You should try to order a right-sided leads. So if elevation in right-sided leads V4R, V5R, that is the most specific sign to diagnose RV. Also, if you don't have those RV right-sided leads, then you should look for this sign, which is ST discordance in V1, V2. This means is that suppose you have ST segment elevation in V1 and V2, but ST segment elevation is more in V1 rather than V2. Or you can have ST segment which electric in V1 and depression in V2, which is much more marked. Or you can have ST segment elevation in V1 while you have ST segment depression in V2. So there is discordance between ST in lead V1 and V2. If this is predominantly present, you can be rest assured that you are dealing with RV infarction. So as you can see here in this ECG given case, ST is almost isolated, and while in V2 we have this marked ST depression, and lead 3 showing ST elevation more than lead 2, you order sided lead, you get this, that is the right sided lead are showing V4R and V5R ST segment elevation. So you have diagnosed right ventricular infarction. Now one must remember that these patients with right ventricular infarction are usually hypertensive, and in these patients the blood pressure is more of preload dependent. So if you give nitrates, you are basically doing the preload and you are pushing the patient more in hypertension, more in cardiogenic shock. So any patient who presents with RV infarction with hypertension, basically nitrates will be very carefully given. While if this was in if you had this only inferior infarction and not lateral not infarction, if you had only lateral infarction, probably a nitrate would have been an appropriate therapy. So again, this is to emphasize that correctly diagnosing ECG things on ECG not only helps you to make a diagnosis but also make a therapeutic decision. Now this is just a summary of sort of things of ST elevation MI equivalents. So this is the classic ST segment elevation MI, where you have elevation at 40 to 60 seconds after the J point should be present in more than 2 congruous leads, and in the limb leads the cutoff is 1 millimeter elevation, and in the precordial leads the cutoff is more than 2 millimeter ST elevation for patients younger than 40 years old, male patients. While if the patients for the patients more than 40 year male patients, if the patients are younger than 40, then suggest that they should have at least 2.5 mm ST segment elevation. While for women, the precordial lead should show only ST segment elevation is sufficient to make a diagnosis of conventional STEMI. Valence type A and type B we have already discussed. D waves, T waves also we have already discussed. Then there is something known as Shakti. So this is nothing but where the J point depressions very smoothly into a convex sort of ST segment elevation. It is also on a ST segment STMI equivalent.
Yeah, you will have to keep a track of time. We are almost midway.
So these are the other STEMI. Right, sir. I'll finish off with another two or three cases, then we'll stop. So this is another patient with 36-year-old male patient, history of hypercholesterolemia, and presents to us with chest pain. So with the light of ECG findings, what is the best approach? Whether should we thrombolize this patient or we should go for a conservative management? So we'll have minutes for the poll as we are running short of time, and then we can go for the discussion. And maybe we can discuss the questions in the end, so that if we have time, we can discuss. Okay, am I audible?
Yeah.
Dr.
Yes,
Smith,
sir, yes.
am I audible?
The results favor thrombolysis.
okay, the results favor thrombolysis. Then we spend some time. Okay, so what are the important findings here is that you have a global sort of segment elevation. You have ST segment 1, lead 2, AVF, then some sort of lateral leads V3 to V6. So if you have this sort of global ST segment elevation, no reciprocal ST segment depression, then one must think about another differential diagnosis, that is pericarditis. So how does one differentiate pericarditis from STEMI? You'll see in the next slide. Okay, so before we go on to that, we must understand there are two types of ST segment elevation, which is one is concave and one is concave, non-concave. So the concave ST segment elevation is nothing but a line from the tip of the T wave. The ST is pointing away from the QRS complex, then this is a concave sort of ST segment elevation. If the QRS complex, this is non-concave or a convex type of ST segment. You can get both of these types of ST segment elevations in acute coronary syndrome, while in pericarditis you get only the concave type segment elevation. So the finding ECG demonstrates here many features of classic acute pericarditis. So you have ST segment elevation, segment depression, and also most important to note is we have a downward sloping of the TDP segment. So this is of downward sloping, and this is called a spodic sign. So if you have spodic sign with the ST segment elevation, specific to diagnose pericarditis. The other differential diagnosis would be pericarditis versus benign early repolarization. Again, to differentiate these two, what we need to do is we need to take a ratio of the ST height to the T height. So this is this ST segment T wave height and T height. ST segment height. So if you take the ratio, if it is less than, more than 1:4, you are dealing with pericarditis. If it is less than 1:4, you are dealing with benign early repolarization. While in STEMI, usually you don't have global sort of ST segment elevation. You usually have ST segment elevation in a particular territory. You have ST segment depressions. Also, the ST height as well as the T height can be of any ratio in STEMI. So basically, you sort of follow up these patients, no reciprocal changes at any point of time, and the diagnosis in the previous pericarditis. Important thing to know is if you thrombolize this patient pericarditis, you are pushing the patient for pericardial tamponade, such a good approach. So important is to recognize this two diagnosis of global ST segment elevation, which is repolarization and pericarditis. Okay, I'll just go through one or two. Yeah. So this is case number 7. Just one more case after this. After this, we'll hand over to Sanjay. So this is another patient who presents to 48-year-old male, presents to us with chest pain. He is having hypertension and the saturation is dropped. It is around 83%. So what, in the light of the above ECGs, what is the first thing that you would like to do? Whether you would like to order a cone here or you would like to do an echo here. So in the light of this ECG, I think you can do both of them in a clinical scenario. But the question is, in the light of the above ECG, what is it that you would like to do? So we can take a quick short poll in another 10 seconds, and then we'll discuss the answer for this one. This is case number 7.
Meanwhile, there's another question in if cath lab is not available, can we thrombolize if valence is positive?
No, sir. I think there is a controversy in regards to that. Both in Deventer T wave as well as in valence, the guidelines do not you sort of recommend thrombolysis as such. The best thing is to be, to sort of admit the patient, do serial ECGs. Yes, if the frank ST segment elevation MI develops, you can thrombolize. But just based on the basis of Deventer's T wave or the valence syndrome, you cannot thrombolize the patient as of now.
Okay.
So the answer is I've gone through the poll.
This is 85% in favor of echo. So yes, people have become wise after your presentation.
So they picked the right.
Yeah.
I'll go through this ECG very quickly. So basically, you have sinus tachycardia going on here. So sinus tachycardia 1:1 AV conduction. Then what you have is you have sort of QS sort of complex, QS, or there is a small r, there is some slight doubt. Then you have in V1, V2, and V3. Then you have T wave inversions in these 3 leads. With that, you have T wave inversion lead. So we have, with this ECG, you will have a couple of differential diagnoses because the patient is having hypertension. So you would like to think whether this is acute coronary syndrome, enteroseptal infarction with such BP. The other differential diagnosis is pulmonary thromboembolism. Pulmonary thromboembolism, because there is a pattern which all of us would have read from our MBBS MD days, that is S1 3 have an S1 S wave here in lead 1. You have a Q wave in lead 3. So you have a diagnostic dilemma whether this is an acute coronary syndrome or pulmonary thromboembolism, and in both the case scenarios troponins will be positive. They can be, and while an echo is very easy to differentiate both of them. So we did an echo and this was pulmonary thromboembolism. So with this, why it's not moving? Yeah. So in pulmonary thromboembolism, there is no single ECG finding which is diagnostic of pulmonary thromboembolism, but there are certain. So if you have right ventricular strain pattern, if you have new onset right bundle branch block along with sinus tachycardia, and you have a pattern in an appropriate setting where the patient is hypertensive, also hypoxic, then the diagnosis is tilted in favor of pulmonary thromboembolism. While one must remember that this S1Q3T3 pattern, which is commonly described, is neither specific nor sensitive alone. So if you take the sign alone, it is not sensitive and specific. But if you take it alone with the along, you'll be able to diagnose pulmonary thromboembolism in that sort of sense. So I think with that I will stop here, and I would like to invite Dr. Sanjay to give his talk. If there are any, take them in the end. So I'll stop sharing.
While Sanjay is uploading, I think for pulmonary embolism, if you have a T wave inversion in 3 and V1, that picks up most of the times pulmonary embolism. That differentiates them from acute MI or anything else.
Yes. So, many of the authors have described this pulmonary embolism as a great, it can mimic almost anything. MI, it can mimic anterior wall MI, and many ST segment elevations with pulmonary thromboembolism. So, finding alone which can help you pick up, but there are certain basically in the correct context we can thromboembolism. So over to you, Sanjay.
Yeah, thank you, Javed boss, and thank you, Smith sir, for giving me this opportunity. So without much ado, I'd go on to the next series of ECGs. So as Javed sir showed, probably all of the ECGs are patients who have come to us or me or Javed sir during our emergency routine. So going on to the next cases, they are primarily relate to electrolyte imbalance and how dyselectrolytemia can influence the ECGs. So just a quick review. So we know the cardiac action potential begins with the entry of sodium. That's called the depolarization phase, phase 0. And you have the phase 1 where you have potassium efflux, and phase 2 where potassium continues to go out of the cell along with calcium entry. And finally, the phase 3, which is the repolarization phase. So correspondingly, the ECG, you have the QRS, and the phase 3 is mainly contributed by the T wave. So why only potassium, calcium, and magnesium? Why are these ions only affecting the ECG? Why not sodium? This is a common question, and this because the cell membrane is much more permeable to potassium than sodium. So the resting membrane potential of the cell is closer to the equilibrium potential of potassium, and the RMP, or the resting membrane potential, is maintained by the continuous outward movement of potassium through the leak channels. So on this background, let us go to the first case. So this is a 55-year-old on chemotherapy for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was started 2 weeks prior. He comes to the ER with complaints of nausea, vomiting, dark urine for the last 12 hours, and persistent giddiness. So this is the ECG. So have a quick look at it. And I give you 3 differential diagnoses. So not just the ECG. I want a clinical diagnosis from you based on the history and based on the ECG. So we'd wait for around 20 seconds. The first option is atrial fibrillation with complete AV block. Second option is a slow junctional rhythm. Third option is a sinoventricular rhythm.
Dr. Sanjay, 66 for the first option, AF with complete AV block, and 1/3 for the sinoventricular rhythm.
Yeah, so this is an interesting ECG. This patient came to our ER, in fact, and if the ECG alone was given, all the three options are correct. But as I told you, I wanted a clinical diagnosis, and from the ECG, we can see that there are no P waves. There's a regular RR interval at around rate of 35. So it could be atrial fibrillation, complete AV block. It could be a junctional rhythm, which is beating very slowly. And it could also be a sinoventricular rhythm. So among the three, a patient on NHL chemotherapy, nausea, dark urine, giddiness. So what's happening? And what are the T waves? You have a peak T wave with a prolongation of the ST segment. So are there features of hyperkalemia? Probably hypocalcemia. So it is. So this is the classic manifestation of a tumor lysis syndrome, where you have peaking of T waves, hypocalcemia effect, where you have the prolongation of the ST segment, and the patient can have such a slow ventricular rhythm. This is called a sinoventricular rhythm. I would come on to what is actually a sinoventricular rhythm after the following slides. So hyperkalemia per se, the earliest feature is the peaking of T waves with increased amplitude up to the potassium limit of 5.5. With increasing potassium, you have QRS widening, and you can have P wave widening, flattening of P waves. Finally, you have the sine wave asystole or VF. So just the correlating with the electrophysiology. So peak T waves is basically because you have heightened conduction of the potassium channels. The early part, you have the shortened QT. And as the potassium increases, it inhibits the sodium channel. So the phase 0, as you see, the slope of phase 0 decreases. So the conduction velocity primarily slows in the Purkinje fibers of the ventricular muscle, then the atrial muscle, then the ventricular muscle itself, and lastly the AV node. And in some cases, you can in fact have an ST elevation, which is due to an injury current. So what is a sinoventricular rhythm? As I told you, the sinus node and the internodal tracts and the AV node are usually resistant to the effects of hyperkalemia. So you have the sinus which is beating, but because of the severe hyperkalemia, the atrial muscles are not being depolarized. So through the internodal tracts, the impulse travels to the AV node and the ventricle gets depolarized. So in our case, you would see that the P waves are completely absent because the atrial muscle is not being depolarized by the hyperkalemia, and you have conduction to the ventricle. So this is called a sinoventricular rhythm. But another catch point here, though hyperkalemia per se wouldn't affect the rate of the sinus firing. So you can see that the sinus rate itself is slow. So this would probably be because the patient has an underlying sick sinus syndrome, which hyperkalemia has exacerbated. So among the missed causes of hyperkalemia are the rhabdomyolysis or release of intracellular potassium, tumor lysis syndrome, and all the other causes we are all familiar with. So coming on to the second case. So this is a 77-year-old male with a history of an episode of syncope, frank syncope. He fell down, he injured his head, and 3 months back. Now he's admitted with giddiness for the last 24 hours. The serum potassium is 6.5. The creatinine is normal. So the ER physician comes, he calls you, and he treats the hyperkalemia with calcium gluconate and starts nebulization. So within 45 minutes, the potassium comes down in the ABG. Potassium is now 4.8, and you have this ECG. So now the question. So is a pacemaker warranted in this patient? Yes or no? So I'd show you the ECGs again. So this was the first ECG. You can see it's almost sinus rhythm with probably a complete AV block. History of syncope 3 months prior. After potassium correction, you have this ECG. So is the pacemaker warranted? So
Dr. Sanjay, it's 50-50.
Yes, sir.
50-50.
50-50. Yeah, this is always a diagnostic dilemma which is seen in our ER. We have patients like this. So just one clarification. Hyperkalemia can cause AV block, but you should understand that would only be in the presence of pre-existing conduction system disease or structural heart disease, or the patient having very strong beta blockers or amiodarone. So in a normal heart, in a normal patient, hyperkalemia would not cause AV block as such. So just coming on to the ECG, you can see that the sinus node is firing and the atria are in fact being depolarized. You can see beautiful P waves. So this means that the hyperkalemia has not affected the depolarization of the atrial muscle. It has only affected the AV node. So this in fact is a definite indication that the AV node in this patient is already structurally damaged. He requires a pacemaker. And another important fact, if you come back to the ECG, even after giving the potassium, you could see it's a sinus rhythm with a right bundle branch block, QRS duration of 120 with a left axis. So in any patient with a history of syncope, if you feel it's a frank syncope, it's not vasovagal, it is not postural, it is a classic syncope with a right bundle branch block, left axis block, it's a bifascicular block with a syncope, refer him to a person who can evaluate. You can do an EP study, you can measure the conduction system timing from the within the AV node, which we call as the HV interval. This patient requires a pacemaker. That's it. So coming on to the next case. So this is a 45-year-old male, chronic kidney disease, due for dialysis. So this is an ECG. So this is similar to a previous case. Let's see if you catch it. So the question is, the ECG is showing A, hypercalcemia with hyperkalemia, hypocalcemia with hypokalemia. So I'll give you probably 15 seconds. It's relatively a simpler question. A is hypercalcemia with hyperkalemia. B is hypocalcemia with hyperkalemia.
Your simpler question did not have any answers. So there's no poll, 0 poll. Oh, now it is there. Again, it's 50-50.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, it's a chronic kidney disease. We are sure about the hypokalemia. You can see the peak tented T waves. And what is there suggesting the electrolyte disturbance regarding the calcium? So we should understand that the calcium usually affects the ST segment. It does not affect the T wave per se. So you can see, though the T waves are peaked, you can see that from the end of the QRS to the onset of the T wave, the ST segment is almost flat and it's prolonged. So this is a classic sign of hypocalcemia. And this triad, where you have a prolonged ST segment, a peak tented T wave, along with LVH, this is called a tent on a desert sign. So it can be seen in conditions where you have hyperkalemia with hypocalcemia, classically chronic kidney disease. Number 2, tumor lysis syndrome. So as I told you, the prolongation of the ST segment alone without marked changes in the T waves are classically seen in 3 conditions: hypocalcemia number 1, number 2 hypothermia, and also long QT3, where you have a late onset T wave and the QT is prolonged. So this is basically because the phase 2 or the action potential, the ST segment, corresponds to the influx of calcium, where ST segment classically is affected in calcium ion changes. So coming on to another different ECG, another history, 68-year-old non-valvular AF, normal LV function. So he's been on tablet flecainide 100 milligram BID. His initial creatinine when the tablet was initiated was 1.1. He's had an history of vomiting, diarrhea. So because of the dehydration, the creatinine has jumped up to 2.5. His serum potassium is normal. He comes to the ER with feeling of tiredness, fatigue, vomiting, and you see this ECG. So I have 2 ECG, the ECG A on the left and ECG B on the right. So I want you, so ECG A was the presenting ECG. You have given him something and the patient has reverted to ECG B, say within 48 hours. So my question is, what have you treated him with? A, soda bicarb, B, calcium gluconate. So just to help you, the ECG A, so it's a wide complex bizarre tachycardia rate of 120, and the arrows are probably pointing at AV dissociation. I see some hump on the T waves of the QRS. So probably it's a VT. So question is, patient on a flecainide, you have a wide complex tachycardia, increase in the creatinine, would you treat him with soda bicarb or calcium gluconate?
Soda bicarb is 2/3 and 1/3 is to calcium gluconate.
Yeah, kudos to all the people who say soda bicarb, because you have a classical history. Patient being on flecainide, you have a rising creatinine. This was in fact a patient from my alma mater from Jayadeva, where we had a case report. So this is a classic sign of flecainide toxicity. So the patient came to us. The idea of a treatment with soda bicarb is you increase the serum pH of the patient to at least 7.55 to between 7.5 and 7.6 with the aim of dissociating or displacing the flecainide molecule from the sodium channel. So flecainide blocks the sodium channel and that prolongs the depolarization across the myocardium. So you have the bizarre QRS, and you give it as a bolus, and then you can in fact start an infusion, and gradually the patient will revert to normal. So you don't give calcium gluconate, but among the differential diagnosis of broad QRS tachycardia, you should understand that you should have in your mind flecainide sodium channel blockers can cause QRS prolongation with a wide QRS tachycardia. Hyperkalemia can also cause a wide QRS tachycardia. As I told you, with increasing serum levels of potassium, you can have severe hyperkalemia with this kind of QRS. And to differentiate it with a bundle branch block or an SVT with a bundle branch block, you should understand that in hyperkalemia and sodium channel blockade, the QRS widening affects both the initial and the terminal portions of the QRS. Whereas if it's just the bundle branch, you'll have the widening only in the latter part. And you'll have associated features like the tented T waves. So coming on to the next case because of lack of time. So this is a 65-year-old hypertensive with renal bruit. He's come to you with poorly controlled hypertension. The BP is 180/110 and with multiple episodes of syncope for the last 5 hours. So this is a presenting ECG. I give you probably 10 seconds to look at it. And then, so my question is, the serum potassium is 2.5. Would you treat her with IV potassium only? IV potassium and IV magnesium? IV potassium, IV magnesium. But you would also call your cardiology resident or your cardiologist asking him, sir, I need an emergency TPI in this patient. So I'd go back to the ECG, hypertensive, 65-year-old, renal bruit, multiple episodes of syncope. With this ECG,
it's potassium, magnesium, and TPI for all of them.
Yeah, so that's a good call on all our physicians. They are very astute physicians. So this was in fact another of our own patient. The patient had come to us as we probably saw, the QT interval is very prolonged, and when you have a QT with a U wave, so you usually target the largest wave in the TU complex. For example, if you take the largest wave and you draw the tangent. So this is known as the tangent method. And in our case, it was 570 millisecond. And within 10 minutes of the first ECG, we had this. The patient had prolonged QTC with frequent TVCs. And the most important factor in this patient again was the history. She had history of syncope. So our resident kept her on a very close vigil. And next you have this. So this is a classic Torsades where you have an R on T. You can see classic twisting of points. And the patient collapsed. So because the ER physician was vigilant, put in the potassium, gave the magnesium, put in the TPI. So the treatment of a Torsades is you search and treat for the etiology, connect the patient to DFib patches, intravenous potassium infusion, and bolus of magnesium 1 to 2 grams IV stat. And you overdrive pace with a temporary pacemaker. If you don't have a TPI, you can always start an isoproterenol infusion, 0.5 to 5 microgram per minute. Your aim should be to target at a heart rate of 100 to 110 to suppress those PVCs, those triggering PVCs. So among the other causes of prolonged QTC, we always know it's hypokalemia, hypomagnesium. You have a host of drugs, commonly antipsychotics, antidepressants. Among the antiarrhythmic drugs, class 3 drugs, amiodarone, sotalol, and class 1A drugs. And we should always remember myocardial ischemia and inherited long QT. So hypokalemia, particular changes, prominent U waves, you have prolongation of the pre-R interval, you can have premature beats, and prolongation of the QT interval that predisposes to Torsades. So this is another patient, 45-year-old, presented to the casualty with history of chest pain. He just collapsed in the casualty. So this is the ECG. So I'd give you 20 seconds. So my question is, you treat with IV potassium, thrombolysis, IV potassium and magnesium.
So it's thrombolysis for all of them.
Yeah, so very good. So we should all understand that though we think of hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, the most common cause of a polymorphic VT is ischemia. and it's acute coronary syndrome. So always be wary of all the critical clues with Dr. Javed sir told all of us, your devinters, all these patients collapse because of a VF, an RONT which triggers the VF. So IV thrombolysis, that is the right answer. So another interesting case, 65-year-old non-ischemic DCM on Cordron for atrial fibrillation for the last 10 years. So she comes to you with giddiness after 3 days of acute gastroenteritis. So this is the ECG which you see. So there are 3 sets of ECG in this case. So this is the first ECG, which is the presenting ECG. You can see the sinus rhythm with 1:1 AV conduction. You have a left anterior hemiblock, prolonged QTC. The QTC is definitely more than half of the RR interval, almost 600 milliseconds. But this is the ECG which was taken 3 days prior. She was on Cordron for the last 5 years. So ECG 3 days prior, before the acute gastroenteritis, sinus rhythm 1:1 AVC, LAHB, QTC is normal. So you're wondering what could be the cause of syncope. So you actually do a Holter. You're thinking whether it could be a tachybrady, whether the patient had a transient AF and a sinus pause. So the Holter picks this up. So I would direct all your attention to this Holter. So you see a PVC and you see this beat. So I've given the red circle. So my question, so is this normal or abnormal? The post PVC beat, is that normal or abnormal? I again give you 20 seconds. So we have
almost
the poll.
almost a mixed house. 57 for normal and 42 for abnormal.
Yeah. So as Javed sir always told you, so in any clinical context, look at the symptoms. So this is a patient who's been on Cordron for such a long time, but she's come to you with syncope, and you see that the QT is prolonged at baseline. And this is a PVC, and following the PVC, you have 3 complexes, and 2 complexes have the QRS and the QT segment very clearly. You can see the first complex following the PVC, there is definite potentiation of the U wave. So this is known as post-PVC U wave potentiation. This is a marker of a polymorphic VT, both in patients who've been treated with antiarrhythmic drugs, patients for long QT syndrome. A post-PVC potentiation of the U wave is a harbinger of Torsades. So you be very vigilant in such patient. You expect that the patient is going to go for a Torsades. Her history of syncope means that it was polymorphic VT and Torsades which caused that. You treat, probably the patient had hypokalemia on the background of amiodarone, caused the prolonged QT, the Torsades. You treat with IV potassium, magnesium, isoproterenol or TPI, and the patient will be saved. You should understand that Torsades due to prolonged QT will be like an acute MI. You can lose the patient within minutes unless you're vigilant. But at the same time, you treat the acute cause, you tide over the crisis, you save the patient. So another important feature. So we've seen two classes of drug. One is sotalol, amiodarone, and flecainide. So class 3 drugs like sotalol particularly has something known as reverse use dependence, meaning that the effect of the drug and the toxicity of the drug are more prominent at slower heart rates, particularly for sotalol. This is primarily because sotalol only blocks the IKR channels. So in fact, we actually recommend patient comes in atrial fibrillation, we use sotalol. If the patient is still in AF, you cannot determine the QT interval. You wait for the patient to come back to sinus rhythm and you then look at the QT interval, which would be definitely prolonged. And amiodarone has less of reverse use dependence because it blocks both the IKR channels and the IKS channels. So it has equivalent effect at fast and slow heart rates. Flecainide has something known as use dependence. Being at faster heart rates, you have the pronounced effect. Even the toxicity is pronounced. For example, if the patient, you're suspecting flecainide toxicity patient at a rate of 60, the QRS is not broad, you can actually, they recommend to do a TMT. If there's an increase in the QRS duration by more than 25% at a faster heart rate, it means that the flecainide is at a toxic dose. So on a similar line, this was another patient who came to us, atrial fibrillation, previously on controlled ventricular rate, mitral valve prolapse, severe MR, came to the ER with breathlessness, with atrial fibrillation, with fast ventricular rate. So previously she was just managed on beta blocker. Patient came back, severe MR, MVP, on rate control for atrial fibrillation, comes to you with heart failure and AF with fast ventricular rate. The ER physician, all of us thought that amiodarone was safe in this patient. We gave amiodarone. After, you wouldn't believe, after 150 bolus and 300 milligram IV infusion over a period of 8 hours, patient was converted to sinus rhythm. But this was something very striking to all of us. She was in sinus rhythm with a prolonged QTC. QTC was almost 600. So I was very worried regarding this patient because I didn't want to shift her to the ward. Patient was otherwise perfectly okay, no syncope, nothing. She was in the ICU comfortably sitting. She required probably some plastics. But 48 hours, or I would say 36 hours after this ECG, patient had a sudden arrest in the ICU. Our physicians were there who quickly revived her, and we could save her. So this was only because whenever you see some patients, probably around 2% or less than 1% of the patients are explicitly sensitive to amiodarone. When you see amiodarone causing prolonged QTC, don't shift the patient to the ward. Keep in the ICU, make sure that the QTC normalizes, and only then shift the patient to the ward. So coming on to the 8th question, couple of questions. So 50-year-old with atypical chest pain, you have the following ECG. So would you advise a serum potassium level or a serum calcium level?
It's all are opting for serum potassium.
Yeah, I think that's the right answer. This is just to drive in the point that hypercalcemia and hyperkalemia both can cause ST segment elevation. But in this ECG, we can clearly see that the T waves are peaked, and you can see there is some prolongation of the PR interval. And one point to differentiate, as Javitsa mentioned, your peak T waves in Devinters from other. Hyperkalemia will cause global peaking of T waves. You'll see the T wave changes in all the leads. Whereas Devinters, your T wave changes, the peaking of T waves will be in those leads where the vessel is occluded. For example, you have an LAD occlusion, you can have in the precordial leads. There is Devinters sign, which is also described in the inferior leads where in an imminent RC occlusion. So compared to localized T wave changes, when hypokalemia, you would have a global T wave changes. So coming on to hypercalcemia, as I told you, it only affects the ST segment, so you'll have a short QT interval. Hypercalcemia doesn't actually cause much of T wave changes. You'll have a flat T wave, and you can have ST segment elevation. You can have in extreme cases Osborn waves. So you should remember, among the differential diagnosis for ST elevation MI, hyperkalemia and hypercalcemia are the electrolyte changes. This is the classic ECG in hypercalcemia, where you see the shortened ST segment, T wave flattening, and the pseudo ST elevation. So this is an interesting case. This is a patient with a dual chamber pacemaker who comes to you with recurrent syncope, and the pacemaker was implanted 2 years back. 1 month before the pacemaker interrogation was done, absolutely normal. So the patient comes to you, and you see this ECG. So I want you to carefully look at the ECG and tell me which electrolyte disturbance can cause the above changes. Is it hypercalcemia, hypomagnesemia, or hyperkalemia? I'll give you 20 seconds. Sure, sir. 10 seconds. You're out of time. Yes, sir. Can we have the poll?
It's 100% for hyperkalemia.
Yeah, exactly. Good answer. So there are 3 things in this ECG. You can see it's a dual chamber pacemaker. That's why you have 2 spikes. It's beating at the rate, you have spikes at the rate of 75 per minute. But you can see that the spikes are not capturing the atria and not capturing the ventricle because you don't have a P wave or a QRS. So hyperkalemia can increase the threshold for capturing the atrial and the ventricular muscle, number 1. And the second thing, you see some beats are being captured by the ventricular lead of the pacemaker. And you can see that the ventricular conduction is very bizarre. You have very broad QRS. That is because hyperkalemia inhibits sodium channel conductance. You have the broad, bizarre QRS. And number 3, you can see that the pacemaker are not sensing the QRS complexes. That's why you're having the spikes again on the T wave. So hyperkalemia can also affect the sensing properties of pacemaker. This is very important in ICDs in particular. So you're right. So coming on to the last case, so a 75-year-old non-ischemic DCM on digoxin and cordron for atrial fibrillation. Patient comes to you with this tachycardia. Patient is having a borderline blood pressure of 90/60. So my question is, would you stop cordron or would you stop digoxin? So I'd suggest all of you to have a close look at lead V2 and V1 and give me the answer. So we give 10 seconds again.
So everyone is asking to stop cordron.
Okay, then I think it takes some discussion on this. So as I told you, you can in V1 and V2, you can see that it's a wide complex tachycardia. It looks regular, but alternate beat have complete change in axis. If you look at V2 and if you look at lead 1, there is almost more than 90-degree change in axis. So one is having a left bundle branch block morphology and one is having a right bundle branch block morphology. And those stars, you carefully follow the stars, they are actually the P waves. So you have AV dissociation with a ventricular rate which is more than the atrial rate. So this is definitely VT. And in view of the changing axis, there is something called a bidirectional VT. So all of us know that digoxin causes multiple arrhythmias, but there are some arrhythmias which are very specific for digoxin. Among that is bidirectional VT. So in a patient who's on digoxin, you see the following ECG, a bidirectional VT, or you see a paroxysmal atrial tachycardia with variable block. You assume it is digoxin toxicity, stop digoxin, send for serum digoxin levels, and then treat the patient. So, but just coming on to digoxin toxicity and digoxin effect. So, in a patient, you have three features: digoxin toxicity and digoxin effect. Classically, you have the inverse tick mark sign, which is if you see lead V5 and V2, you'll have a depression, a downsloping ST segment depression, but the J point is not classically depressed in digoxin effect, and the T wave is usually above the baseline in digoxin effect. And these classical, the inverse tick mark sign is only seen in the lateral precordial leads in digoxin effect. If you have extension of the changes up to lead V1, V2, V3, it means it's digoxin toxicity. If the T waves don't come above the baseline, it's digoxin toxicity. If you have the J point which is depressed, you have digoxin toxicity. So these are three features. So number one, inverse tick mark sign, only in V5, V6, it's just digoxin effect. When you have inverse tick mark sign in all the precordial leads, it's digoxin toxicity. And when you have the downward slope of the ST begins from the isoelectric base, digoxin effect. When you have a J point depression, it signifies toxicity. And the T wave is usually above the baseline in effect. And the T wave does not rise above the baseline in toxicity. So it can cause PVCs, paroxysmal atrial tachycardia with block, junctional tachycardia, bidirectional VT. The most specific ones are PAT with variable block and bidirectional VT. So just one more point that it's similar to hypokalemia, but digoxin does not prolong the QTC. This is important. So in summary, I would say take a good history and a thorough physical examination. Hypokalemia can cause peak T waves, can cause peak QRS widening, but AV blocks, the patient requires a pacemaker. Hypokalemia cause polymorphic VT, treated as an emergency, and calcium does not affect the ST segment and not the T waves. So finally, I would like this quote with D.H. Lawrence. So what the eye doesn't see and the mind doesn't know, you believe it doesn't exist. But on the corollary, when your mind knows something and you look for it in the ECG, so all these with electrolytes or with, as David Boss told, with ischemia, so you have subtle clues in the ECG. So you look at the patient clinically and you expect something in the ECG and look for it, and only then you complete your clinical diagnosis. Thank you.
Right, and this was Osler, William Osler, your last quotation.
That
So
quotation was D.H. Lawrence, sir. He was a
D.H. Lawrence
poet
was the
in
first
the UK.
And the second one was the
The second one.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
We exceeded time by 10 minutes. Most of the questions have been answered.
Yes.
You'd like to add a few comments, Javed, to Sanjay's talk?
Yeah, if there is time, I would like to show two more ECGs. Am I audible? If there is time, I would like to show two more ECGs, which I thought were we ran through them because of time. So if there is time, just two more ECGs in 5 minutes, we'll wrap it up.
You can show, sir.
Sure. Sure.
Okay, there is one question from Dr. Manoj Gupta to Dr.
I'm
Sanjay.
audible?
Which arrhythmia is not expected in digoxin toxicity?
Okay, sure.
I think you don't, you look at, I think you can actually expect all arrhythmias, but there are some arrhythmias which are very specific, particularly as I showed you, the atrial tachycardia with variable block. That's basically because of the effect of digoxin. Digoxin increases automaticity, and number two, it has a vagal effect. So it increases automaticity, so you have atrial tachycardia, and because of the vagal effect of digoxin, you have the variable block effect. So I think considering these two effects of digoxin, it could basically cause any arrhythmia. But you have arrhythmias which are very specific to digoxin, and you look for them.
And there's one more question. Can we have D Winters pattern in inferior leads? Dr. Rajiv Dhawan from Jalandhar.
Yeah, it can. In fact, you can have DeWinter. There are case reports which say that you have DeWinter-like pattern in inferior leads and which shows an imminent RC occlusion. It is possible. And regarding the previous question, it is said that you cannot have a Mobitz type 1 AV block in digoxin. So it's said. So that probably he is probably expecting that. Yeah. I think we go on to Javed Boss's presentation.
No, it's not.
Javed, we have a poll with this also.
ECGs which I thought you can poll, sir. If you want to poll, you can poll. So this is a very simple sort of case. A 48-year-old gentleman, diabetic, with osteoarthritis knee, presents with some post-pandemic discomfort, and you see this ECG, and because there is some finding on the ECG, can we take this patient directly for angiography? Is this a right approach, or is this wrong approach, or we need? So in the light of this ECG, we can pick among any of these three. Again, a certain point which needs to be driven home. That's why I have shown this ECG. So anyone can comment. Maybe Sanjay, you can comment if you want to.
Poor man's TMT.
Yes, this is poor man's TMT. Absolutely. The genius of Dr. Smith has already recognized this. So this is nothing but what we have to see here is that there is a PVC lying in between this ECG right there. And post PVC, what do you see here is T wave inversion. So this T wave inversion is biphasic. So you have Wellens type post PVC. So if you see such sort of, so if you have any PVC in any of those ECG rhythm strips, this PVC can be utilized in a lot of ways. One of the things to see is that Sanjay has already shown you post PVC. If you see QT prolongation along with a U wave in a base patient who has got a baseline QT prolongation, a harbinger of torsades. Post PVC, if you have a T wave inversion, it indicates ischemia. And in this particular case, we have a T wave inversion in lead V3, which is biphasic. So this indicates a probable LAD lesion. In many other patients, we can have ST segment elevation, which is only visible on the PVCs and not on the routine leads. So that is the significance of PVC. This is the, sorry, one more slide, last ECG for the audience today. And with that, we can finish today. So this is another patient with recent onset chest pain. Just two simple options based on the light of this ECG. What do you think? Whether this patient is significant or not. So just two options. Just on the light of this ECG, can we pick something on this ECG to say that, okay, no, this is significant or not? Just drive home the subtleties of ECG nuances so that you can pick up findings to determine whether the pain can be symptomatic, significant or not. So what this ECG shows is U waves basically. So as Dr. Sanjay had shown you one of these cases with U waves, basically U waves are seen in patients wherever you have bradycardia. In normal subjects also, in presence of bradycardia, you can see U waves. So important of the U wave is that the U wave usually very little in very smaller in comparison to the T wave. It should not be more than 2 or 3 millimeters. It is seen in usual patients, and it has usually a similar as the T. So if the T wave is upright, the U wave should be upright. If it is inverted, the U wave should be inverted. Here what you see is the T wave is upright, but the U wave is inverted. So is in a patient who has got a chest pain, very, very specific finding that this chest pain is significant and this is ongoing ischemia that is going on. A very subtle nuance of ECG. If you recognize this, you will understand that this is ongoing ischemia and probably needs just neglecting this as a non-cardiac pain. So these were the last two ECGs which I wanted to show. And I think if there are, once again, we would like to thank Dr. Smith and also Dr. Sanjay. And if you would like your comments, whether you would like more presentations like this in future. We had left out palpitation. Because ECG is an on-growing field. Probably we started reading ECGs in our MBBS days, and even Dr. Smith will agree. We have read so much, but we'll still get ECGs which can clean bold you anytime. So the best way to keep up with things is to keep it. And we would like your feedback this webinar, and if there are any comments on to how to improve it, or if you want to have on some certain other topics in a future date, these suggestions are welcome. And once again, I'd like to thank the IPCA team also. They last week around this webinar was programmed, and they had certain technical issues. Probably the Zoom servers were down globally, and they persisted with us, and they came up with the goods today. So thanks to the IPCA team.
Thank you, Javed, and Dr. Sanjay. Thank you, and happy
Dr. Sanjay, your closing comments, then we can finish.
I think special thanks go to Javed because he has taken out his time during his just day of festivity. Must be fasting throughout the day, and then he has to sit and go through. So it becomes tougher, and there is IPCA team. They have done it very well, and all the participants they have participated well, and it was the success is shown by the interest that has been shown by the participants. So thank you, and we sign off now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you,
Thank you so much, sir.
Wish you a very happy Eid. See you. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mubarak to
Hello. Hi, Javed sir.
Hi.